Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. I know a lot of you have come a long way, and we appreciate that. I'd like to take the opportunity of welcoming and introducing to you Michael Gadd, who's the President of Angus Australia. I'll introduce shortly Peter. For those of you Angus New Zealand members, also like to introduce Graham Ambler. Graham's here. He's recently been appointed as new CEO, and yes, that up. And you can catch up with him at the end. And also, probably some of you have probably never seen Kylie. No. But Kylie is in the communications role, and she's the one responsible for sending out e-newses and Facebook and Twitter and things like that. So welcome to them. And without any further ado, Peter, welcome. Peter Parnell is the Chief Executive Officer of Angus Australia, and he's going to present to us on the SAR benchmarking program. So, thanks, Jim. Welcome. Hope you all will enjoy this. Lots of questions.
So yeah, I'm pleased to be here. I have a chance to talk to you. So I've got a lot of material here I can throw up. It'd be good to make it a bit interactive, and I'm certainly keen to address your interests and needs as well. So as I go along, if there's particular things that I gloss over and you'd like to pull me up on, I'm very happy for that to happen as we go through. But we've this site benchmarking program is a very exciting project. When the Angus Australia Board agreed to co-fund this a couple of years ago with Meat and Livestock Australia, we were very pleased of being able to do this, because I think this is in my mind, this is one of the main reasons why we should have breed associations like Angus Australia and Angus New Zealand, is not only to record cattle and look after databases, but also take the lead in doing the research and development that our members require for the future. And I think that's one of the real reasons it stands Angus out apart around the world, is that Angus breeders collectively and their associations have been willing to invest in some cases considerable resources in these types of programs. So we're delighted that we've had some involvement of New Zealand breeders in the program and seen the merit of being part of it, and certainly we hope that that will continue, and we certainly hope that we can continue to provide you useful information out of it, as well as our members in Angus Australia, Angus breeders in Australia. We'll see how we go. We might have to pull down the shades a little bit or turn some lights off. I had sort of fun sitting in the dark, but they might be able to see this. I just wonder whether a compromise might be able to lights on and that down. But, try the light back on there with the same shade down. Is that effective video, Hutch?
Oh,
yeah, so I'm sorry about having you sitting in the dark. So the objectives of this program, we've got a few objectives. One is to provide contemporary progeny test data on elite Angus animals, but a diversity of Angus animals, which we've been able to achieve, and especially for traits that are not being measured on farm. So clearly things like feed efficiency and the end product traits, carcass and meat quality type traits that we have very little of in our databases, we need a lot more of, and things like heifer fertility. So the focus on those difficult to measure traits, obviously things like growth performance and scan performance, we get a lot of that data from on-farm performance recording, but there are some things that you really do need to require to have a structured program like a progeny test program. So that's a key objective. Another one is to validate and refine Angus breed plan. There's obviously the breed plan is a major tool, and a lot of our breeders in Australia and New Zealand rely to assist in their selection decisions. And we also always need to have confidence that breed plan is actually providing the correct rankings of animals based on performance. And as we get more data, we can then refine breed plan. So a good example of that is, if you look at one of the traits in breed plan, is retail beef yield. Retail beef yield, we have EBVs for that. It's the main reason really why we're investing in scanning animals for muscle and fat, is so that we can get a good estimate of their breeding value for retail beef yield. But at the end of the day, the amount of data we actually have on retail beef yield itself, so you can only get that when you bone out carcasses and actually measure the retail beef yield. And we've got a total of 1,200 records that drives the whole breed plan analysis. Australia and New Zealand breed plan for retail beef yield, those EBVs are based on correlations with other traits. The only actual real data for retail beef yield is 1,200 records. So through this program, for example, by looking at getting some of that yield data, which we're currently looking at for the current cohort, we can add to that retail beef yield database and make breed plan more accurate for a trait like retail beef yield. So that's just one example. And just about every trait, a difficult to measure trait, you can use the same argument for. Feed efficiency is another one. So whilst our EBVs are giving us the best estimates of some of those traits based on our understanding of the relationships with correlated traits, we also need to put plans in place to at least record some animals in the population, particularly contemporary animals today, for those traits, so we can refine breed plan, make sure it's relevant and remains the most accurate tool we've got we can use. And I suppose the third key objective is to assemble a strong phenotypic database of measurements on animals that we can then use to evaluate gene marker tests. And we already have gene marker tests in the marketplace. We already use them to some extent in genetic evaluation. There are lots of predictions and promises and about where that will take us in the future. It's pretty exciting prospects really, but we can only utilise that information if we've got good phenotypic data and measurements that we can calibrate those DNA tests against. Otherwise, the greatest people make the greatest claims they like about these tests, but unless we've actually got some data where we can evaluate it against, well, we're really in the dark. So I guess that's the third reason, and it's really that third reason is the key driver why we're able to argue that this is actually rather than an industry service program, it's a research program. So this SCI benchmarking program, it's a part of a suite of projects that Meat and Livestock Australia have been co-funding with us under the overall umbrella program is called the Beef Information Nucleus Program. And the argument is that it's actually a research program, so we can collect this data to be able to refine the DNA markers into the future. So that gives it a very strong research focus as well as providing really good industry data as we go. Neil, I'm predicting I'm going to need a drink of water soon, so would you mind being able to ask a glass of water? Yeah, thanks. Sorry about it, I should have thought of that before we started. So this very difficult to read diagram basically summarises what the program is. Unfortunately, I haven't got a pointer either, but we started back in 2010 where we selected bulls and did the first joining of cohort 1. We're now in 2014 where the red line is, and we're still analysing the data from cohort 1. We've now collected all of the data. The timelines, we hoped that we had all the data by the end of 2013, all the feed efficiency data and the carcass data collection. It took a little bit longer than that. We only had that data early 2014, and we're still basically analysing it. But along the way, we've been able to get that data into the breed plan analysis. And then we've got other cohorts, cohort 2, cohort 3. Originally, we planned to run the program for 3 cohorts to finish at the end of 2015. But with Angus Australia Board and with the agreement from MLA as well, we've extended the program for at least 3 more cohorts. We're currently about to start the joining. We're selecting bulls for joining in the 5th cohort, and we've got at least 1 more. But it's my hope that we'll be able to continue this program into the future as a permanent part of our landscape, R&D landscape. It's very expensive, so we need to look at ways we can achieve that from a financial perspective, but I think programs such as this, in my mind, are very important for us to look at ways to continue. And hopefully for those of you that don't really understand much about the program as we go on, you might see the relevance of that. So the target, thanks very much, Neil. The target then over the 6 cohorts is to have progeny data on over 200 bulls, and those progeny being at least 2,500 steers and 2,500 heifers. An important part of the program is it's collecting heifer data, not just steer and end product data. So a lot of the progeny test programs that we've run previously in Australia and in fact throughout the world have really focused on carcass traits through progeny test programs and really haven't put a lot of consideration into the female fertility side. So an important part of this program is to also collect data on the heifer progeny. So it's a bit hard to see in this slide, but each year when we have the calves are weaned, they're grown out, then we join the heifers, naturally service join all of the heifers that are still around available in the commercial cooperative herds at that point to get natural service days to calving information on those heifers. And I can show you some of that data from cohorts 1. So just a little bit, this makes it a bit easier, I should have gone to this earlier, sorry. So this is what cohort 1 looked like, started in 2010, finished in 2014. So there's still a lot of data in that we're looking at analysing in much more detail, but as we've gone along, the traits that are in breed plan, we've entered the data into breed plan as the project has progressed. So those of you that have followed this program would have realised that EBVs have been constantly updated as we get the growth data in there, as we get the feed efficiency data in there, as we get the carcass data. So this first cohort, we used 35 bulls, joined over 1,640 cows through fixed time AI, and got 57% conception. So the whole design of the project is centred around getting at least 50% conception, which is about 25 progeny per sire. So we inseminate 50 cows per sire to generate 25 progeny on average, and we've been able to achieve that. So cohort 2 then started in 2011. Sorry, cohort 1 there were 2 New Zealand bulls in it. Cohort 2 we've got some more, there might be half a dozen bulls in cohort 2. I think we had 47 bulls in total. They're joining in late 2011. Those calves now, we would expect that those animals would have been feed efficiency tested at the end of last year, but because of the seasons in the commercial cooperative herds, the whole program was delayed by about 6 months. So this NFI testing is still happening, so it's sort of happening in 2014. The last group are currently in the feed efficiency facility. I'll show you a little bit more detail about that in a little while, but we're doing the feed efficiency testing at the moment. So this whole program here, rather than finishing at the end of 2014 for cohort 2, probably it'll be the middle of, it'll be probably close to the middle of next year before it finishes, by the time we've got all the animals finished and slaughtered out of that program. But certainly the rest of it, the heifers have been joined, we'll get the heifer calving data. Those heifers are calving, starting to calve now, the heifer progeny, so we'll have the fertility data, in this case a lot earlier than we'll have the carcass data for cohort 2. Again, 5 cooperator herds involved, the same 5 to the first 3 cohorts. Then cohort 3, 2012 joining, that will finish, those calves have now been weaned, and they'll be gearing up for feed efficiency testing later this year, hopefully. We've got some tough seasons still in some of the cooperative herds, so it may be delayed a little bit relative to this schedule, again, like it was for 2014. But we had 40 bulls involved in cohort 3. So over the first 3 cohorts, we averaged 40 sires each year, and that's our long-term target, I suppose, is to include at least 40 sires in the program each year. Having said that, cohort 4 was last year, joining. Selected the bulls for joining late last year. We only had 21 bulls in the end, because when we were assembling bulls back in August, September, that was when DD was announced. So quite a number of those bulls that were being lined up were either carrier bulls or potentially carrier bulls that hadn't been tested. So we had lined up in excess of 30 bulls. In the end, we only ended up with 21 at joining. So last year's cohort 4 joining was quite a bit smaller than what we obviously would have liked. So that's why we're hoping then for cohort 5 for this year to increase our numbers quite a bit more. So I guess our long-term target, say, is 2,000 cows joined to 40 bulls a year. So cohort 5, we've got about 2,500 cows lined up. So if we had 50 bulls, for example, we could use 50 bulls. The reality is we'll probably have about between 30 and 40 bulls, I think, for 2014, but we're actively trying to see more bulls this year, and certainly would welcome more bulls out of New Zealand as well. So in terms of the progress of the program, there's the 4 cohorts with the ticks of where we've already got all of the data. I've mentioned most of the data that down the side, as well as weighing the animals and getting a net feed intake measure on, and I'll show you some pictures of the facility in a moment. We're doing ultrasound scans of the heifer progeny as well as the steer progeny. The steer progeny are serially scanned. They're scanned when they first go into the feed efficiency test, and then 100 days later when they come out. And then after the feed efficiency test, they then go to a long-fed feedlot at Ranges Valley, north of Armidale, where they're fed for another 150 days. So they're 250-day fed cattle. And some people have argued, well, why are we putting all of the cattle through that 250-day feeding program and not finishing some at a younger age, and maybe finishing some on grass, etc. Well, sure, we could do that, but by doing that, it reduces the number of animals in any particular comparison group. And by at least going for the long fed program, for better or worse, it enables the maximum potential expression of things like feed efficiency and carcass merit and traits like marbling, etc. By doing the serial scanning, and that's the data we're yet to really analyse properly, we can say, well, what would have happened if we did only feed these animals for 100 days instead of 250 days? What would have the outcome been? And we can determine that to some extent from our ultrasound scan data that we took after 100 days, for example. So we hope to be able to look at predicting what the outcome would have been if some animals were killed at a younger age. But having said that, I would be very confident, based on other research data that we got mainly from Australia through the Beef Cooperative Research Centre, where they did actually take sire progeny groups and slaughter them at different ages, at different market endpoints, and had a very high correlation, something like 95% correlation between the outcomes of each of the different slaughter ages. So that the correlation at that endpoint was very consistent across the market endpoints. So for that reason, we've opted to go for the market endpoint that provides maximum expression of variation in some of those traits. The daughter fertility, that's natural service joining, as I mentioned, so we get a clean measure of days to calving. If we AI those heifers, we obviously are going to reduce our ability to be able to get to good fertility data from them by synchronisation. So it's naturally joined, and we've got the carcass as well as the chiller carcass measurements. We also take a sample of meat from every animal to get an intramuscular fat percentage determined in a laboratory, so what the actual percentage of fat in the muscle is, intramuscular fat, and the tenderness. The reality is we had very little variation in tenderness in Angus, so it's an expensive measure, so I'm not sure whether we'll continue to do that beyond the first 3 cohorts, because we're getting very little variation expressed. Everything's tender basically by the time they're fed through that type of program, so there's very little genetic variation for tenderness in Angus. If they were crossbred cattle with some other breeds involved, we might get more variation, but it's a very positive aspect, I suppose, to know about Angus. They're all tender. Yeah, Richard?
Yeah, Peter, just to clarify, that all females, are they scanned at 400 days?
Yes.
Off grass?
That's right.
So no female has any
No.
feed system whatsoever?
No.
Just,
No, they're reared in the commercial herds under their normal commercial practice, all off grass, and they're scanned, as you say, 400.
400. Thank you.
Okay, and the other cohort, sorry, so I've been focused on cohort 1. The others where feed efficiency testing is in progress. I know there's a number of New Zealand bulls in cohort 2, so there might be more interest. We've scanned them all at 400 days. The steers will be scanned coming out of the feedlot, where they'll have their 600-day weights taken. The daughter fertility is in progress. The heifers are calving essentially at the moment. Cohort 3, and in cohort 4 we've had the calves. Calves have been born for cohort 4 now. So it's a long-term program, but it's basically going on. It's on track pretty well. I don't like slides with words. We'll look at some pictures, so I won't worry about that too much. But so I just want to. This is a lot of information in a slide. So I just really want to point out to you the sort of information that's recorded and how it's reported, and I'll refer you, a lot of this stuff is either on the Angus website, which I'll show you where it is, or will be put on there. But what we're able to do with, if it's taking birth weight, for example, in cohort 1, what we're able to do is if we look at each individual bar here, for all these different sire idents, the individual bar shows what the average birth weight in kilograms was of the average progeny for each sire. And then the bar there is the average of the contemporary group that they were compared with, so the weighted average. So there were a number of contemporary groups, obviously. We had 5 cooperator herds, and there were some other contemporary group factors in there, which meant we had a number of contemporary groups. So we weight the performance average over the different contemporary groups and do the same sort of adjustments to the data that would go into prior to a breed plan analysis. And so we can actually compare then the average performance of the sire progeny group with the contemporary group average. Now we've got another slide that shows, if we just take that subset out and look at this. So for this bull here, DGJX36, that's the average birth weight of his progeny adjusted for differences in age of the cows, for example, was about 40 kilos, and then similarly for these other sires. So the next part of the graphic then shows the red bar then is the average for all the contemporaries that those calves were compared with. So look at this X36 bull, who compared all of the calves, their average here was about 38 kilos, so on average his birth weight, his calves weighed a couple of kilos heavier than the average of all the contemporary groups where they were represented. So some bulls, they average lower than the red bar, some about the same and some lower, some higher and some lower. And then the blue bar here is just the number of progeny. So, for example, this bull here had about 32 progeny, X36 had about 28 progeny. So we're certainly, our target, as I said, was on average 25 progeny per sire. So that's really looking at the raw data. They're not EBVs, they're adjusted averages, so phenotypic averages. Obviously we would expect them then to line up pretty closely with the EBVs. So if we look at these few bulls again, go back to our overall chart, and then look at weighted contemporary group. So X36, his birth weight on average are 3 kilos heavier, and then this one here they were about 2 kilos lighter, and here about 3 kilos lighter. So that's the average of their birth weights compared to all the bulls I was compared with. And then if we'll look at how this is X36s again. So his average adjusted weight of his calves was about 40 kilos. And then these are the contemporary group averages. The overall weighted contemporary group average was 36.9. So there's a contemporary group there of 5 calves in one herd, one contemporary group of his. And here's some more. So on average, most of his calves are above this diagonal line. It means if they're above the diagonal line, they were heavier than their contemporaries. If they were below the diagonal line, they were lighter than their contemporaries. So this is a really good example of this bull. Well, his calves are obviously heavier than their contemporaries on average. They're not all going to be. Some will be lighter, but on average, they're certainly quite a lot higher. So we had 27 progeny on average, a difference of plus 2.7 compared to contemporaries. And that's almost the same sort of analysis, really, that what breed plan does. Really, it takes that then for all of the contemporary groups that animals are used in and does exactly the same sort of thing. And that contributes to estimated breeding values. So this next horrible slide, I'm sorry, shows the EBV differences. So now the blue bars are what the EBVs were back in December 2010 before the program started. So all these young bulls would have had EBVs based on their own performance and their relatives' performance. And then the red bar then shows what the EBV is now. So that X36 bull we're talking about, his EBV has gone up from where it was based on the data out of this program in particular. And some have gone up and some have gone down. The triangles here are the accuracies. So accuracies for most bulls have gone up. There were a couple of bulls there that are already highly accurate bulls, including a New Zealand bull here, already highly accurate. So his new accuracy is about the same as what it was before. His EBV didn't change very much because it was already fairly highly accurate, so it didn't have much of an impact on the EBV for that particular trait.
Bill, you just said though that that these change inaccuracies are likely to be mainly as a result of the benchmarking bull data.
Yep.
But we
For
have
some size, for most size,
yeah, we just have to make it very clear though that we're looking at 4 years there, and that some of these bulls have been used out in the wider
industry.
industry.
Yep.
So there could be some changes in their EVVs and accuracies
Yep.
from industry as well as benchmark.
Yeah, that's a good point, Neil, and that's
Yeah.
certainly the case.
Yeah, I think.
Particularly for a trait like birth weight, some of the traits, though, that wouldn't be the case, of course. Food efficiency.
Well,
for
feed
example.
function obviously, but the growth traits, milk, anything else
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Right?
Your objective 3 was to validate genomics. Did you genotype or 50K? I think the Zoetis 50K them, and so you could put up there molecular breeding values across the top there and see how they compared.
All of these sires do have a Zoetis 50K. All the progeny
Yeah,
have another profile, not a Zoetis one.
yeah, whatever.
So
yeah.
we've got gene markers on all. So we've got medium density or high density on all of the sires, 50K, and all the progeny. We've got a 10K on basically.
Yeah. And how did they stack up?
No, I haven't looked at that.
Okay.
No, we'll probably wait until we've done the recalibration, because at the moment the calibration for the Zoetis 50K has got a correlation of about 0.3 or 0.35. You probably know better than me. It's certainly less than 0.4. I expect when we recalibrate it, I expect it to be quite a bit higher than that. So I would have thought that the relationship, would be similar to what you got up with a 0.3 relationship. There'd be a lot of variation around the expected line. It's not highly correlated with the gene marker, but there is a correlation there. I can't show you what I haven't actually got where we've done that specifically. But we certainly can do it. So again, I'm just drilling on these sires. So XD6 here was already fairly highly accurate, but his EBV did change quite a bit, and I showed you the compelling data why his EBV should change, because he is well above contemporary group averages, and some have gone up, some have gone down. Just amongst these few, we've got these ones here, all their EBVs came down relative to where they were, but across the board, across all of the sires, on average, it was just as many went up as went down. On average, the change was pretty much zero. So we collected all this data. Some EBVs go up, some go down. As you get more data, exactly as you expect with EBVs, as you get more data, they'll change. But on average, the change will be zero across the population, and that's I guess that's the best we can do, because they're estimates at the end of the day. But I think it's if nothing else, it was a good demonstration that for birth weight for that particular trait that. The EBVs will change as you get more data, and the changes will be less for animals that are highly accurate than ones that are lowly accurate, but on average, I think we're calculating the average change is essentially zero. And that's sort of gone through for other trends, gone through for other traits as well.
Was that the same in cohort 2 and 3 that you've got data on there?
Yes, it is. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, I just showed another bull there, circle around CJME3, just to reinforce again. So he's gone down quite a bit. And when you look at his individual data, his average overall was 35 kilos. If you take the average of all these numbers on that axis there, it's 35 kilos, whereas the average of his contemporaries that he's compared with was 37.2. And his progeny were essentially pretty much below the diagonal line, which meant many more of them were below the contemporary group average than were above the contemporary group average. But you still always have that variation. So that had an impact on his EBV. Neil has already made the point that when looking at these EBV changes, we made the choice that we would analyse this data through breed plan. Rather than present the data largely in raw data form. And what the downside of that, if it's a downside, is that it does include the data from relatives and other herds for some of these traits. And of course, if there are changes to the breed plan analysis model since 2010, which there have been, or some significant changes to correlations and things for some traits early this year, that will also affect the EBVs as well. But even with those changes, the results are such that we've had just as many go up as gone down, even with those changes implemented as well. But we need to remember that there are other factors at play here to some extent as well. I'll go through this reason. This is 600-day wait. It's just again to show that this is the data that we've got on the website for cohort 1 and coming for the other cohorts. Same deal for each individual bar. Then is the average for the progeny average for each sire. The red line is the contemporary group average. Some are above and some are below. So that's 600-day wait. There's a couple of examples I've circled there. One where the contemporary group average was less than the progeny group average was less than the contemporaries. There's another one where it was considerably higher. And then if we that next slide probably should show where that's reflected in the EBV. So this plot over here where his contemporary group average is lower, his EBV has come down, and over here the EBV has gone up. So it's really, I suppose it's nothing else, it just demonstrates that's exactly what breed plan does across all herds when size is used across herds. This is a very clear example where we can identify inside a benchmarking program exactly what's going on in these cooperative herds. Okay, so it sort of helps us with our confidence that the breed plan model is doing a reasonable job for growth in that case. So all these steers, for cohort 1 we had about 380 steers in total. All of those steers then went to this Toowoomba feedlot facility, which is near Armidale, run by the University of New England, where they've installed a growth safe feeding system. There's a picture of a component of it there. There's 32 of these individual bins, and so in there in banks of 8. So in that pen there, we probably had about 80 steers, for example, 60 to 80 steers per pen. They all share those that system, and each bin's on load cells. So as an animal comes in, it gets electronically identified. They've got electronic tags. Knows what the animal is, and this bin is weighed several times a second, so it knows exactly what the weight is of that bin. So when the animal backs out, it's had a feed. By difference, we work out how much that animal's consumed. So they're in that system for 70 days. So it's a 70-day feed efficiency test where we measure their total feed intake. I haven't got a picture of it, but out the back of the pen as well, there is a weigh station over the water trough. So every time the animal goes to get a drink, its body weight is taken. Okay, so the combination of those body weights in feed intake, we're able to calculate differences in feed efficiency. So we use this concept of net feed intake. You may see it if you read some of the American literature. Technically it's called residual feed intake. It's residual, it's the feed intake differences that remain amongst a group of animals after you've taken into account the expected differences in intake based on the differences in their body weight and their growth rate. So we know that heavier animals and faster growing animals are going to eat more, and that's part of gross efficiency. But in addition to that, independent of the weight of the animal or its growth rate, we still see some variation in some animals eat more than others, and that's really what we mean by net feed intake or residual feed intake. It's a feed intake that can't be explained by differences in growth. Any feed intake that we explain by differences in growth, we don't really need to measure it because we can measure growth much more easily. So that's the whole concept behind net feed intake, and research done in North America, USA and Canada, and also in Australia in particular, there's been strong interest in this particular trait. And there's a certain body of knowledge and some evidence to support it. The theory that differences in net feed intake are more likely to be related to differences in maintenance requirements of animals, particularly cow maintenance requirements, example, as opposed to simply looking at their gross efficiency and looking at their feed intake relative to growth rate, for example, which would be what a feedlot would be interested in, how much they required to get these animals, how much feed that requires to put an extra kilo of body weight. What we're interested in here is how much feed is required for an animal to maintain itself, as well as to put on weight. And that's the whole concept of net feed intake. So here's an example of how it's calculated for a group of animals. So these are 2 pens at Talimba from the first cohort, 88 steers in total. The blue diamonds are 1 steers in one pen, the red are steers in another pen. So on average, if you look at their average daily feed intake relative to their predicted feed intake, we can predict their feed intake based on their growth performance for that group of animals on average, and that's what the black line would be. And some animals then are going to this animal up here. For example, it consumed quite a bit more than predicted, so it consumed about it's about 19.5 kilos a day, and based on its growth performance back on the line here, we were expected to have only consumed less than 18 kilos a day. So it was eating more than we expect that animal to eat in that batch of animals based on its growth performance in that environment. So for any particular group of animals that go through, their average feed intake for the group will change depending on the time of the year and whether it's been cold, and whether they're eating more or eating less, the age of the animals. There's lots of factors that go into how much an average of the group their average feed intake for the group will be. But there will always be some steers. This one down here, G149, it only consumed about 15 kilos a day, and we expect based on its performance, its growth performance, most compared to other animals, we would have expected to have eaten over 16 kilos a day. So it was an animal with a negative net feed intake, which is a more favourable net feed intake. Okay, so we calculated that for all of these steers. I should have used that to make it easier to explain. And then, so when we plot it all out, we get this sort of curve. So this is the net feed intake on that. Most animals are about 0. So measuring growth performance of animals, on average we can, most of the animals will consume about what we expect based on their growth performance, but there will be some animals, like the ones out this end of the extreme, that ate up to 3 kilos more per day than they should have eaten, if you like, based on their growth or what we expect them to consume, and likewise on the other end extreme, some up to 3 kilos or so less. And that's the same sort of variation that's typically been found in other research projects. It's also got this typical curve that we see in most traits where most animals are around the middle, around average, but there's also some extremes. And of course in this particular trait, some of these extreme animals down here with very negative net feed intake, we hope that at least part of the reason for that is that they're genetically superior for net feed intake, and they'll pass that on to their progeny. And the research that's been done around the world suggests that this trait, net feed intake, is about as heritable as growth rate. So we certainly would expect that if we select some of these animals with negative feed intake, well, a good proportion of their progeny will also have negative feed intake, and we can make genetic progress for that trait. And that was the reason why we had to do the research. Otherwise, we might be just measuring something that's not heritable. Okay, so sorry, these are pretty boring sort of slides, but same sort of thing. But it's a bit more scattered in this case. So look at the horizontal bars. That's the average of the contemporary groups, where the progeny for each of these size were represented. And then the bars are the average for the particular size. So it's a little bit harder to interpret this than the growth ones. We just zero in on these 3 animals here. So this sire here, which is UK bull, in fact, the average contemporary group for net feed intake for that particular bull, the average was about minus 0.5, for example, and he was quite a bit lower than that, minus 0.8 or something. So his net feed intake was quite a bit lower than the contemporary group average. This particular bull here, the contemporary group average was up here, and he was even lower. So that's D78 bull, and then there's another one here where the contemporary group average was close to 0, and his progeny were quite a bit lower than that again. So there are 3 bulls where consistently their net feed intakes were below contemporary group average. There are other cases where, another one over here for example, where the contemporary group average was here, about point +4, for example, and his progeny group average was well above that, about +0.8. So that all had a positive, on average, a positive net feed intake. Bill?
Peter, I think I checked this when this first came out, and an interesting point to me was that we have this perception that big cows do not convert feed very well, and we have breeders marketing that. I think when I checked that, the bull on the right-hand side of the circle, NMM, whatever you want.
E78?
No, NMME.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. I think, if I remember rightly, he's got the highest mature cow weight EBV in that whole group. And a bull like Pine Gate Wide Group, 4197, has got quite good feed intake, positive feed intake, actually has got a very low mature cow weight. So yeah,
It's quite,
the genetic effect was much more important.
net feed intake is pretty independent of mature cow weight, because mature cow weight is highly correlated with growth and with the average weight of the animals during the feed test. So it's a growth. So net feeding, that's one of the good things, if you like, about net feeding. It makes it a bit harder to understand in some ways, but it's one of the good things about it. It's quite independent of growth. So you get animals that are, you can select for feed efficiency, I guess, independent of growth. And there might be other factors that determine what's the optimal growth, the size of the animals and their net feed intake. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There are big animals and there are small animals, and you can have big animals that might have a lower feed intake than some small animals. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so these are the weighted differences in the contemporary group average. So that they'll actually, there's a group of bulls that were all, their feed intake was lower than the contemporary group averages consistently. Then we look at that EBV. So this is the estimated breeding values for net feed intake. So I've seen EBVs in kilograms per day, and these three bulls, as we would expect, based on the data, have got negative net feed intake estimated breeding values. Now, in this case, I'm pretty sure that there's no other data coming from industry herds, so this would be entirely due to the data collected from the project, because at this point in time, there is no other sources of data for this trait going into the breed plan analysis. Some bulls, there's one over here that we looked at that had his contemporary group average, his progeny group average was well above the contemporary group average, and his EBV was quite positive EBV. So what's an EBV of +1 compared to a bull that's got an EBV of -1, for example? Well, that's 2 kilos difference in EBV for net feed intake. So we'd expect that the progeny of the animal with the lower EBV, his progeny would, on average, consume a kilo less than the average of +1, so half the EBV difference. So the EBVs for net feed intake interpreted exactly the same as a growth EBV. So it's half the difference between animals in their EBV will be expected to be expressed in their progeny. Okay, just days to calving, just to show you again the same sort of data is available for days to calving. Might be guys scientific training, I don't know, but I've always been taught you should always start a graph at 0. If we started this graph at about 200, for example, we'd see much bigger differences. Typically, the days to calving is around about 300, but some are lower, some are higher. Unfortunately, the numbers of heifers are typically less than 10 progeny, so we might have started off with 25 progeny per side, but by the time you get heifers reared through the system to go into days to calving, we've got some of those that have only got 1 or 2 heifers that make all the way through the system. So it's, there's a lot of dropout when you run a progeny test program like this. It's staggering the dropouts that occur. I guess it's no different to your herds when you're breeding cattle and you have a good group of young bulls, and by the time bull sale time comes, where you've only got a portion of them left, or heifers, similar sort of problem occurs. But we've joined every heifer available in those cooperated herds. So we've got EBVs have gone up, and we've got aberrations here where we only had 1 progeny, and it was this would be an example where in fact that heifer didn't calve, so it would have got a penalty record. And days to calving gives a penalty record for those heifers that don't actually calve. So this is the D88 bull, so just go back. D88 is this one here. So again, it's only based on, I think, 8 progeny, but certainly its average days to calving for D88's heifers were lower than the contemporaries that they were compared with. This shows it here more clearly. So in fact, on average, they were 8.4 days less days to calving compared to the average. Had one here though that would have got a penalty record because it didn't calve, and the rest were the ones that did actually calve were consistently had shorter days to calving, which would indicate that they conceived earlier in the joining period than their contemporaries. And that's reflected through on the EBV. So this is the EBV, so that's D88 also started off here, would have been, you know, a pedigree estimate pretty much, and now it's got data that's driven the days to calving EBV for that bull down. If you look at the one down, the graph down the bottom, some pieces have changed in EBV, some have gone up, some have gone down based on the additional data, exactly as we would expect. And accuracies have consistently gone up, and this days to calving is a real issue for the Angus breed in Australia, and I suspect in New Zealand as well. We're just not getting very much good quality days to calving data. A lot of our good breeders, if you want to call them good performance recorders, are also using a lot of AI, and whenever you use AI, of course, the chances of getting days to, you don't get days to calving data on heifers that are exposed to AI programs. So typically the accuracies on these bulls, a typical group of mainly young bulls, a couple of older bulls, you know, like the New Zealand bull here already started off with a reasonably high accuracy, but the typical accuracies are still only down around the 40% mark for most young bulls. We need to be able to increase that you know, by doing a much better job at collecting days to calving records from cooperation with commercial herds and utilisation of programs like this. So that's a challenge that we're going to embark on trying to do something about it in Australia, and I think we need to look at what we do in New Zealand as well. You'll be facing exactly the same problem.
I think it would just be interesting here to let the audience know here that in New Zealand there's probably only 1 or 2 herds out of 180 that are actually accurately recording days to calving. So we need to, as a breed, we really need to look at that and try and help educate people on how to improve that.
Yeah, and we face the same thing in Australia. It's, I think we do a lot better at recording that information. And days to calving, we had a discussion a bit earlier about the heifer pregnancy. The US, those of you that look at US EPDs, like you see there, but heifer pregnancy EPD, maybe we need something like that. But the reality is that heifer pregnancy is incorporated into the days to calving figure because the non-calvers get a penalty record. So that the variation in heifer pregnancy should be incorporated in the days to calving. But I believe that one of the main reasons why it's not really adopted and understood well is that it's just a difficult concept for people to get their head around what it actually means. So, so we need to do a much better education job. So that's just a little aside.
Peter, is there any hope for the heifers that are synchronised, that they will get that technology so that they can get a figure?
Personally, I don't think so, Tim, because once you synchronise them, you've interfered with their natural fertility. I'm not saying we shouldn't be synchronised, but maybe we need to have particular strategies where we decide, well, okay, if we value days to calving information, we need to use take an age group of heifers that we don't, of animals in the herd in the structure. Maybe it's the first calves or second calves, I don't know, but an age group that we deliberately don't AI, so that we can get that data from our stud herds. Alternatively, or in addition to that, maybe we should be actually trying to get that sort of information out of commercial cooperative herds. You might be able to get progeny test type scenarios set up where the commercial herd's using a number of bulls and where they can maintain the contemporary groups, so where we can actually harvest that sort of information out of commercial herds. Maybe that's something we need to look at. But I don't hold a lot of hope, to be honest. There's been research done on it, but personally I just find it's pretty hard to get your head around how you're going to get good natural fertility data out of a synchronised program. this carcass EMA, same sort of graph. I just want to show another example. I suppose here's a bull here, E23, so he's the average of each contemporary group, so of which there was about 12 carcasses. So this is actual carcass. This is not scanned. This is carcass eye muscle area measured on the carcass in the chiller. That's why these progeny group averages, numbers of progeny, the blue dots, range from, some cases we only had sort of 3 progeny. In other cases we had 15 or 16 with carcass eye muscle area. This particular guy here, his progeny's average was well above the contemporary group average. Others there that were less. So here's his graph. We plan to put all these graphs, all these bulls will be also on the website presentation of this information as well, so you can look at this sort of detail. But here's adjusted eye muscle area for his progeny. Range from about 72 up to over 100, but on average they're 87. If you take the weighted average of all the contemporaries that his progeny were compared with, it was only 82.7. So his 13 progeny had a difference of, on average, plus weighted average difference of 4.3 square centimetres above average, and that's been then gone through and reflected in his EBVs. I think this big jump in EBV is probably more than what I would expect even from that data. It's quite possible this ball's had some extra scan records as well gone into the system from the herd he was used in. And the scan data also contributes to this carcass eye muscle area EBV as well. So carcass EMA EBV is mainly driven by actual carcass data if it's available, and these bulls have got actual carcass data. But in the absence of actual carcass data, it's going to be mainly driven by scan data. So this particular bull, he would have some scan data, his own scan data on his progeny in this program, his 13 steer progeny, and he's probably another 13 heifer progeny, plus any scan data that might have come from outside of it. But that scan data wouldn't have had anywhere near the impact the actual carcass data has got on his EBVs.
You've got one there, the 7th long from the outside, its accuracy's gone right down to just about 0. No, this side, the other side. That would
It's got low accuracy?
Yeah, blue line.
So his EBV here, this one here.
What was his accuracy before he started?
No, that's not his accuracy, that's his EBV. So his EBV, it used to be about a +4 bull.
Yeah.
Now he's basically 0.
Yeah, but what was his accuracy on his EBV?
Sorry, his accuracy was up here. So he had an accuracy level here, which is come across here. It's probably about 50% or so, 55%. His accuracy now is, I need a ruler just to work out. He's about 80% now. But so he's, and that's. There's certainly no argument that EBVs are not going to change, because this is what this shows. That some have gone up and some have gone down. Well, on average, they were all right. So the challenge, I suppose, in breeding cattle is to play the averages and say, well, on average, if I use EBVs, they're going to be right, but they're not going to be right all the time. Sometimes they're going to give us a misleading direction. On average, you expect. So if you think, well, that represents 35 bulls. If they're the 35 bulls you might have used in your breeding program over the last 5 years, you would argue on the basis of this, well, if I used EBVs for those 35 bulls over those 5 years, well, I'd have been going in the right direction on average. Some cases I would have gone down, some I would have gone up, but on average I've been going in the right direction. The EBVs on average were correct. So that's carcass EMA. Bored of this yet? Intramuscular fat. So this is marbling, carcass intramuscular fat. Probably less of an interest here maybe than in Australia, but it's obviously an important selection criteria, say for our long-fed market in Australia. Again, the averages, some were above the contemporary groups, some were quite a bit below the contemporary groups. This carcass intramuscular fat percentage is as measured in a laboratory, so we take a meat sample, and that meat sample goes into a lab and they actually work out through the laboratory methodologies the amount of fat in the muscle, intramuscular fat percentage. So that's and that's the same as the what the ultrasound is trying to predict when they're doing ultrasound. They look at ultrasounds, look at the muscle and trying to estimate the percentage fat in the muscle, intramuscular fat, and this is the actual measure of it. So again, we're able to have this actual data then is the direct trait, whereas the scans are as a correlated trait too. So here's, sorry, I'm going a bit quick here. If we look at this bull over here, where his progeny group average was well above the contemporaries, and if we just follow through and see what happened to his EBVs, his actual data. So all of his progeny that was scanned were all above contemporary group averages, basically. Except one here, I suppose, is right on average, a little bit below. And on average, his steers, when they were slaughtered, had 11.8% intramuscular fat compared to the weighted average of all of the others in the contemporary groups where his progeny were represented was 9.5%. So on average, 2.3% more, and then his EBV, the red bar, blue bar was what his EBV used to be, the red one is what it is now, so he's gone up on the basis of that data, as indicated there.
So, Peter, how relative is the scan data to the actual data that you got?
So scan data is a correlated trait to the real trait. So scans, the genetic correlation or the genetic relationship between scan intramuscular fat and real intramuscular fat as measured in a laboratory is about 0.7, give or take a bit. I'm not exactly sure, but it might be 0.68 or something, but it's about 0.7. So that means that you can have 50 or 500 or 5,000 scan records for intramuscular fat. In the absence of any actual carcass data, you'll never get accuracy higher than 0.7. You can't get higher than what that correlation is. Once you start getting the actual data, the real data, if you like, that's when you start getting accuracies of well above what you get from a correlated trait. So with carcass intramuscular fat, if you know that you've got a system in place where you get actual measures of intramuscular fat, scan data is going to be quite limited value to you. But of course, in the industry, the only way to get this data is to generate progeny, grow those progeny out, slaughter them, and collect samples and get intramuscular fat measures. So we can only do that on research or animals in a trial like this. In the industry, we use ultrasound to give us our best estimate based on ultrasound. We can get an accuracy which is not going to be 100%, it'll be about 70%, which is still better than nothing. Yeah.
So can you correlate osmotes, marble scores back to the laboratory to then bring them into the EBVs?
Yes, and we do that as well. Yep. So in most cases where we have had progeny test programs in the past, we haven't actually calculated the laboratory intramuscular fat. We've taken osmote chiller assessment marble scores, and we did on these animals as well. And it is correlated. The osmote ones are correlated, but no better than the scan measurements are correlated with the real deal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if you think, what data did we generate in this program on intramuscular fat? We scanned the steers going into the feed efficiency test. We scanned them when they came out. Sorry, prior to that they were scanned at 400 days. So we actually had 3 scans on each of these steers. We did an osmote chiller assessment on them, so we got essentially a marble score on the steers. We used a special camera that the Wagyus in Japan, Wagyu people have developed. We take a camera image and estimate intramuscular fat from that, so we took camera images on all these steers. Then we've actually taken the sample and sent it to the lab and got a laboratory. So we've got about 6 measures of intramuscular fat on all of these steers. We've really only put into the breed plan analysis at this point in time the scan measurements, and then the actual intramuscular fat on this will override essentially. For the steers, if we just go back here, there's a few of these size only had small numbers of progeny. So here, in this case here, he's only had 3 or 4 progeny. So 3 or 4 progeny wouldn't be enough to have a huge impact on his EBV relative to what we get from scan information on that particular animal. So that's C511. So we follow him through then and look at 5'11". You know, his accuracy, he started off with a high accuracy ball anyway, it's gone up a bit, but in fact his EBV hasn't changed, but because the data we got on him must have indicated his EBV was about right in the first place, which is the case for a high number of balls anyway. Okay, so.
Peter, can I, why haven't you got the EBVs as they stand before you did the test? If you've got the original EBVs when the cattle went in there in 2010, you've got them after you've done the feed efficiency test. Wouldn't it be helpful to have the current EBVs when you do the test, because they would have changed quite a lot since 2010, so do you appreciate what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, well, we can do that, like with
because I mean, it might actually be more helpful, really helpful to sell the fact that the EBVs haven't changed a hell of a lot, you know, because they might be a lot closer, mightn't they?
Yeah. Well, but I think it's we've got to be transparent about the fact that EBVs will change because they're estimates.
Yeah, but if I go to use a bull today,
Yeah.
I don't bother to look back and see what his EBV was in 2010. I'm looking to see what he is today, and then.
See, back in 2010, these bulls were, in most cases, young bulls that would have been similar to what similar age bulls that have been sold at that point in time. So there wouldn't have been any more information that will come on those bulls over time, apart from progeny records that they eventually get.
Yeah.
So I suppose that we believe the fairest comparison is what their original EBVs were when they went into the trial. But yeah, we could go back and look at what their EBVs were, you know, prior to this data going in and what their EBVs are after. But it'll be essentially pretty much the same, guy. But the fluctuations mightn't be quite as big, but it'll be pretty much the same as what we're seeing in those trends.
Problem is the data's going in all the time, isn't it?
It is.
You've got birth weights to it, so you can't have a whole lot of different dates.
No, but what I'm alluding to, this is about, as I understand it, this whole test is to try and prove whether EBVs are thereabouts, aren't we? You know,
that's one of the objectives.
That's one of the objectives, yeah. And so if we looked at the EBVs just before you did the test, that's more meaningful to me, I would have thought, than looking back to see what it was in 2010, because there has been, as you're rightly saying, Neil, a lot of data's gone in from, since 2010.
But probably not on those bulls though, that's what I'm saying. See, the EBVs on those bulls back in 2010 would have been based on the performance measurements were taken on those bulls up to that point in time, plus performance measurements on their relatives. Now, sure, if we looked at what they were in back in say February this year, or maybe just before this data went in, certainly their EBVs might have changed a bit based on relatives performance. There wouldn't have been any more data on those individual bulls. I wouldn't have thought we've gone into briefing because they've already been.
Probably wouldn't on a 2-year-old or yearling, but you take those older bulls like the Pineback bull, the New Zealand bull. I bet his figures have changed a lot since 2010.
Well, that's what we've been sort of looking at to some extent. Yeah. So he's. I don't know whether I've got.
But isn't it taken into account with the accuracy of the top?
Well, it is. Yeah, accuracy is better.
Anyway, look, move over.
No, it's a good point. There's no reason why we can't generate that, but it's just there's only so many ways you can sort of show the data, I suppose. Yeah.
But isn't the point that across a cohort of bulls, some bulls go up, some bulls go down, and you're on average?
That's right.
So
Yeah, and most people are buying a team of bulls. You know, if you're a commercial operation, you're buying 5 bulls a year or 10 bulls a year or whatever. Well, I would have thought that this data here should give you some confidence that that's going to be on average. You're going to be on the money. There's nothing to lose really by using the EBVs as part of your decision. And in fact, a lot to gain, I would suggest.
But essentially it's summarised in the accuracies. What
Yeah,
the guys talking about is summarised in the accuracies.
Yeah, it is. It's
If
largely.
you look at the average of the accuracies.
Continually we see the wider that group, whatever population, the closer it gets to zero, the ups and downs. So it's very risky to put all your eggs in one basket, isn't it? Because it could be one of the ones that goes up, it could be one of the ones that goes down.
So does that not mean part of genomics is going to play?
Well, what genomics will do, in my understanding, is that it will give you a better accuracy right at the start. So if we go back here and look at these bulls for intramuscular fat, so actually, we use intramuscular fat. So they have an average here of about 50%, 0.5. So what that's saying is that if we select on that, if we want to select intramuscular fat and we select on that EBV with an accuracy of 0.5, we'll make half the amount of progress that we would have made if we had an accuracy of 100%, because we're only getting, we're only half, our decision's only half right, if you like. So if we use genomics, and if genomics is shown to have a high correlation with this trait, and as I say, at the moment, I think in replant it's about 0.3, and I think I've seen figures where internationally other people have estimated to be quite a bit higher than that. So we're in the process at the moment of working with Zoes to recalibrate that particular panel, and it may be higher in the future. But what it'll do is it'll actually increase the accuracy at the start, because there's no extra data collection. The DNA test is just an investment, so you collect the hair and you pay the money and you get a higher accuracy just from that simple act, whereas to get this increased accuracy here, you've got to generate the progeny and to collect the data. So the gene tests, if they are shown to be correlated with the trait of interest, will increase our accuracy of selection, just to give us a higher accuracy level. It can potentially also, the other benefit of the gene markers, of course, is that from when the calf's born, and in fact from when the embryo is created, you can collect the DNA sample and make the decision much earlier. That's the other advantage. You get an accuracy of, if you've got a gene test that'll give you might have a genomic test that's got a correlation of 0.5 with the trait. Well, it means by doing that genomic test, you've got an accuracy of 0.5 straight away for that particular trait. So that's the real advantage of it. There's a operation in Australia. I know that what they're looking at doing is actually doing genomic tests on embryos before they implant the embryo. So you can actually take a biopsy of the embryo, do a genetic profile on it, and decide whether you want to use it or not. So that's really turning over generations very quickly. It means that you can sort of really quickly, so as well as increasing accuracy in selection, you can actually turn your generations over more quickly as well.
We let sidetrack for a second. No, I've got the
Device here.
It's an important point, and I don't think it's been picked up on. If there is a flush of embryos, and you do a snip on it, 50k,
yep.
Because in that flush there's going to be the bell shape of who's above and below the average of that bull or parents. By doing a snip chip, you'll find the ones that are above, and those are the ones you implant. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
So that means genetic progress is hugely improved. So it isn't actually
It comes at a cost. Genomics offers great hope for us, and again, we unless we've got this sort of data though on what the real intramuscular fat stuff is, you'll be calibrating genomics against scan data, so you're calibrating the genomic test against the correlated trait rather than the actual trait. So that's why it's so important to get a body of this sort of data. Okay, then I suppose at the end of the day, how does all this add up with the indexes? So all of these bulls have obviously got index values. There's a UK bull didn't have an index value before, but now he does. I'm not sure whether it's really that bad, but he's got a pretty ordinary index value. But the and the other UK bull, but in all these cases, again, index values some went up, some went down. But what the program has really done has been able to identify some animals who've got very high sort of index values that now based on their red bars, what their current index values are, well above 3 average bulls that we predict based on our selection index model for the CAAB long fed index that are the potential bulls that we should be considering making broader use in the industry. So that's the other objective of this program, is to identify elite young animals that should be used more widely across the industry, and it helps us identify those sorts of animals, even at that index level. And then, so that's the rank. So there's the rankings of bulls on their CAAB index value, and those rankings sort of a balance between traits in the index, so maternal traits plus end product traits, hopefully economically weighted according to their economic importance in the supply chain. And then if we look at, you ask the question, well, which bulls have performed well? It depends on what trait that we're talking about. So some bulls have performed better for some traits than others. And on average, the index shows, I suppose, which are the most balanced across the board. But if we look at their ranking on 200-day weight, we've got a group of bulls here that are high growth type bulls in the breed. So if we're particularly interested in growth, they're the sorts of bulls that are ranked highly. Carcass weight, EBVs, pretty highly correlated. The same few bulls have got the high carcass weight EBV. So by looking at 200-day weight EBVs, it's helping us generate cattle with increased carcass weights. So that's one of the reasons why we measure 200-day weight at the end of the day, isn't it? Is to improve carcass weight. And some of these bulls, I won't identify individual bulls, but some of those bulls now have been more widely used across the industry, given they're now being proven through this program. Days to calving, we've been able to identify some bulls that are really superior for days to calving. Very negative figures for days to calving, which means that their heifer progeny are going to conceive earlier in the joining period relative to heifers from other bulls. High muscle area, EBVs, some bulls that are really outstanding for high muscle area. A Kiwi bull here, and another one here. So so it depends on what trait we want to look at, I suppose. So we can generate these sorts of rankings. So we're trying to, again, we're looking at ways, I suppose, also to understand from you as breeders and breeders in Australia. What sort of information do you want published out of this sort of stuff? Because you've seen the masses of data that we're collecting. We can't put graphs like I've shown you there today in front of most people because their eyes will glaze over just like mine would if someone showed that to me without really understanding what's in there. So we need to understand, what's the best way to actually present the data to get benefit out of it. So anyway, just to show you a few pictures of what some of these steers look like. So here's this is after obviously pretty wet at Ranges Valley feedlot. So this is a steer sired by Paringa Red Newman. So that steer's been fed for 250 days, 100 days on the feed efficiency test, and another 150 days in the feedlot. Then when he's cooled, that's his measurements there. So he was 456 kilo. Marble score 3 steer, 25 mils of P8 fat. So that's marble score 3 is sort of what range value targeting in this particular market. They want 3 or higher.
How old?
So this steer, when he was cooled, it'll be close enough to 2 years of age, probably.
Yeah, so he was 456 carcass weight.
Yeah. So they're heavy carcasses. Here's another one, Judy, Steve Progeny Ryland bull. He was 450 odd kilos. He's 3.5 marbling, so he's got a little bit more marbling. That's an image taken actually from the. I mentioned we took camera images of these with a special camera that was developed in Japan by the Wagyu people, and they've got an analysis system that they can then it's an image analysis of that ribeye, and it comes up with an intramuscular fat percentage based on its image analysis. So we're looking at to see whether that, in fact, in the future we might be able to use something like that as opposed to take it. That's because these are big heavy steers. We needed to take a chunk of meat to do the tenderness and intramuscular fat, a chunk of meat about that thick, which in some cases about 1.5 kilos of meat from these steers at about $30 a kilo. So it was quite an expensive exercise just to buy the meat before we even go to the laboratory. So
what was the correlation between the camera and the actual?
I'd like to be able to tell you, but we still haven't properly analysed the data. We're not 100% comfortable with the result we've got from it so far. But I suppose I'd speculate to say that it's not good enough at this stage that we can do away with the actual measurement. I think, in a trial like this, unfortunately. But we hope that we can, maybe by tweaking the analysis a bit more, we might be able to make it a bit more accurate. But yeah, I'd say that we probably will continue just to do the laboratory measurements. I just want to show you a little bit on cohort 2, and unfortunately I had planned a lot more on cohort 2 for you, but I just, well, I know that we've got quite a number of New Zealand bulls, and I've only got, hopefully some of you would identify with some of these idents, so I'm not sure, but all I can really show you at this stage is the EBV changes. I haven't, we're still trying to collate the contemporary group different stuff. You get that graphic stuff put on the website. It'll be there over the next week, I hope. And now we've got a new person working with us on the program, which I'll talk about in a little while. I hope we'll be able to get some of that done a bit quicker. But again, same story. These are EBV ups and downs for birth weight. There's more bulls, so the graphs numbers are smaller. If you like, it's hard to see because we've got 47 bulls in that cohort 2. I just want to show you that sort of thing to, again, give an indication of what sort of information that's been published at the moment out of this project. So that's cohort 2. So that's birth weight, 200-day weight, same sort of thing. The accuracies, you can see that the dots at the top of the graph, the accuracies have pretty much all gone up on the basis of largely on the data coming through this program. 400-day weights, same sort of story anyway. And then we've got cohort 3 bulls. Cohort 3 bulls, we've got birth weights on, and we've got 200-day weights on. So going into the analysis. So won't dwell too much on these numbers or anything in particular. I just want to show you where you can actually see this information for yourself. So on the Angus Australia website, there's a little tab called sire benchmarking. So if you go into there, there's some general information about it, and then there's details on the results from each of the cohorts. So if you go into the second cohort, for example, go into results, that graphical stuff I showed you there will be there for each of the traits, for each of the cohorts over time. So we're sort of developing that as we get the data in. There's also, if you go to the catalogues section across the top here on the Angus Australia website, there's a sire benchmarking catalogues. It's a bit like semen catalogues, but there's sire benchmarking animals. So if you go in there, and then there's, click on here, you're probably familiar with this. This is the same as what you would have, I'm sure, on your system, where you go into that cohort 1, the 35 size, and they're like the sale catalogue, so you can sort the EBVs, look at them any way you like. So they're in there as well. So the future, I suppose, as I mentioned, cohort 1, we've got a lot of really good data. We've put the data that we can into BreedPlan already, but we're just talking about some of the information on the intramuscular fat data and the various other stuff that we've got along the way in that program that we really haven't analysed properly yet, mainly through a resource initiative, but we're sort of looking at addressing that. Cohort 1, we're pretty complete. Further data collection on cohorts 2 and 3. So cohort 2, as I mentioned, the first group of steers just about finished their feeding program at Ranges Valley. That's the first 60 of about 550, and that first 60 will be killed in mid-September, and the rest will be killed. The last group will be killed probably in about three months after that. So it won't be really until the end of the year before we've got all the data on cohort 2 into BreedPlan. And then, as I say, cohort 3, then we've got cattle are approaching the yearling age now, and they'll go into feed efficiency testing later this year. Cohort 3, cohort 4, we've got calves being bought at the moment. And we're looking for cohort 5. As I said, ideally we use 50 bulls in cohort 5. If we certainly want to get close to 40 bulls if we can at least. There's certainly continued interest in the inclusion of New Zealand bulls in the program. It just certainly helps us in a number of ways. It certainly helps with the progeny test. There's benefits for New Zealand bulls if they perform well, and you'll get some interest in maybe the use of those bulls in Australia or elsewhere. but also it increases our genetic diversity in the program for the gene marker side of it. So it's really important that when we do this calibration for gene markers that we've got a good broad sample of the Angus population. Otherwise we might put gene markers that are really nicely calibrated. We've got a higher correlation with one subset of the population, but might not be well correlated with other parts of the population. So it's important that we have a broad, from a research perspective, a broader range of Angus genotypes in the program as possible. And I think that including international bulls in there is certainly very positive for us from that aspect as well. And I guess that's why the Angus Australia Board and MLA have been happy for us to include international bulls in there, because it's, even though we have a cost per bull to be part of the program for our breeders and also for yourselves, that actual cost is only a relatively small part of the full cost. If you think of the full cost of actually generating this data, to do the feed efficiency testing, to do the meat quality testing, etc. It's in the order of it's not quite $1,000, but it'd be on average it would be sort of getting up close to $800 per progeny record. So if you think of it trying to generate 20 progeny, you're talking big dollars, 20 progeny per sire, or we're averaging 25 progeny per sire. It's a big expense item, but I suppose fortunately we've got an opportunity where we do have some leverage through the fact there's a research program. We do have some of that leverage through the Australian government to help support it, and really keen to sort of talk with Angus New Zealand and other people in New Zealand about how we can maybe work together with maybe at least using some of the bulls out of this program in other initiatives that you might be thinking involved over here. So we're certainly really keen to collaborate there, so we can maximise the knowledge we get out of this investment. And as I say, I hope that we can look at ways that this will be an ongoing investment. We're not just doing this as a bit of a one-off to get a sample of the Angus breed for over this sort of 5 to 10 year period. I think it's an important part of our ongoing strategy for genetic improvement in the breed in the future. So that's why I think it's very important for us, and I suggest maybe for yourselves. And finally, the last thing I want to say is that many of you know Bob Dent, who's been the coordinator of this program. I don't do any work on this program, I just get spruiked about it occasionally, but the people who do the real work are, in the past, has been mainly Bob. Bob is known to many of you. Bob's retired as of last week. Retired again, I should say, because he used to be an extension officer for Angus Australia, retired from that. I managed to get him out of the woodwork to coordinate this program and get it up and started, which he's done a very good job on. And the new kid on the block who will be looking after the program from here on is Christian Duff, who some of you would know. Christian has been in New Zealand a number of times, has previously worked with ABRI as part of the SBTS team, their extension team. He's not working as an extension officer for us, he's working as a special projects manager, so he'll be managing this program from here on, and Christian will be working closely with myself and others to try and be more diligent about pumping information out, because we know that a lot of people are really keen to get results quickly. So as the cohort 2 animals move through the system, through their feed efficiency testing and carcass testing, we hope that we can certainly get the data into breed plan analysed and get this sort of format of the result presentation available in real time almost. So that's our objective, and of course these days with the internet, as soon as Australian breeders see it, well, you guys can see it as well. So Christian will be the coordinator of the program. As I say, we're really keen to get more interested in more New Zealand bulls in the program, so please either let myself know or Christian know. Christian's details on the Angus website, but we can certainly put you in touch with Christian if anyone's interested. Guy, I'm really keen for plenty further discussion if people want to have it. I'm finished.
What Guy was trying to bring up before, if we get the EBVs for 2010 of those bulls that went in there, and what they are now with the accuracies, would that give some of our breeders more confidence in EBVs?
That's what I'm trying to put, yeah.
It needs to be from 2010 and what it is today, at the end of that course.
Well, we can certainly do that. I haven't got a picture of it here, but certainly what we've done is we've put all the data, say from of the 120 bulls we've used, and looked at, say for birth weight, we've got EBVs now on 100 of those bulls, not all 99 of those bulls have all got birth weight records with EBVs recalculated, for example. So we can look for a sample of 100 bulls of how their EBVs are performed, and it's a really clear demonstration, just as I've showed you there. We could do that across the whole 100 bulls in a bit easier format to look at than that shows that the relationships.
The EBV there, the accuracy and what it is today, and the accuracy.
Yep.
And that'll give them on a level playing field. One or two will be extreme, but the rest should be on.
Yeah, and what people need to understand is EBVs change because they're only estimates, and they will change. But on average, the change is, there's just as much chance that the EBV will go up and down. But on average, if you base your decisions on EBVs, on average you're going to be going in the right direction. So it's playing the odds, if you like. So if that would.
We'll put on Neil to do that.
Yeah, if we need to look at ways we can use this data to.
Well, we can't do that. It's only these guys, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's what we're sort of keen to understand how we can make use of this data to address some of your needs. If you've got people who still, 2014, don't understand, believe that performance reporting works, well, I think we need to give them the data to show that clearly it does. It's just not. Where's the data that says that it doesn't work? I suppose I'd like to see. Yeah.
I think one of the most valuable things that's come out of this, and I just hope people are listening, is that the differences in the contemporary groups. This is what this is all about, and this is what EBVs are all about. It's about taking an animal and seeing where his progeny fit in a population, which in this case is a contemporary group, and if he's above or below. And we've been back to ABRI on behalf of our members 3 or 4 times a year with questions from individual herds or individual animals on why is this animal not performing in my herd or this herd. And the answer always comes back is when you analyse that animal's progeny in different contemporary groups or different herds, that's when you see the difference either up or down, and that's what creates and shapes his EBV. You can't just go looking at the raw data in your herd or somebody else's herd. It's the difference, plus or minus, from the contemporary groups, and that was really obvious here, and it just applies all over the place.
That's why I've sort of gone through that bit of a painful process with you of showing you the contemporary group averages compared to the progeny group averages, because that's exactly what Tree Plan is doing. That's the way EBVs are calculated.
It's ranking them.
Just going on back to days to calving, how many progeny from a particular sire would you need to naturally mate to be able to get a correlation with the ones that you put to a program of AI through synchronisation? Because would that not be a way of getting over the synchronising of heifers to try and get a days to calving on a sire group? Because obviously there's females involved in there as well.
No, that's a good point, Gerald. So I think what we need to do is make sure that, I'm not saying don't use AI, like a great way of making good genetic progress is to take the best bulls and use them widely through AI across the breed, but we also need to make sure that to be able to evaluate them adequately for a trait like days to calving, we need to make sure that they are used in a situation where we're getting data on that as well. If they're only used in AI programs, to take an example of an American bull that might be used in New Zealand, well, he's not going to be used anywhere naturally. It's going to be AI all the time, and that's really what we need to do with then his daughters. We need to make sure that he might be a high, expensive US bull, so people will get these expensive daughters and think, oh, well, I need to AI them to another expensive bull because it's a very valuable AI-born heifer. I need to AI her then to continue the process. We need to make sure that some of those daughters, those AI progeny daughters, are actually naturally joined. And it's probably not going to happen just by relying on, well, history tells us that it's not going to happen by relying on that data just coming from our stud sector, because our stud sector is going to be using a lot of AI, as it should, to make genetic progress. So we need to actually look at ways, either whether it's programs like this, or maybe we need to sort of think a bit outside the box. That's what we're attempting to think about in Australia, how we can actually set up systems where through client relationships with the stud breeders with their commercial clients. If we can work out some way of recording those commercial heifers to get fertility data, days to calving data on, whether they go into a commercial register, like we've looked at that. We've got some herds in Australia that work with cooperator commercial herds and record them in our commercial register so that they can get things like days to calving information on
Couldn't you do it within the stud, taking so many heifers from the side?
Well, you could, yeah, if you've got the females available, yeah.
How many would you need? Because it's having such a huge influence on indexes, days to calving, etc.
Well, the problem is it's not, Gerald, because we're not recording it.
No,
That-
but
we've got to get off first base first with the days to calving thing before we start talking about the problems with AI size and stuff. We're all recording this stuff, but we're not entering the data, so it's not being captured. There's just virtually 0 days to calving data being captured back to ABRI. So we have to get off first base with our members first and help to educate them on how to do it, and then it'll spread.
One of the things to remember with, you might say like a days to calving or female fertility might have a strong economic weighting in your index. So you might say it's worth 30% or 50% of your index, and that's fine, but if you've actually got no variation amongst the animals that the index has been calculated for, well, the 50% comes back to almost 0 because there's no variation playing with those. Yeah, so we might look at our index and say, oh yeah, that weighting looks about right, so I'm pretty comfortable, that's all good. But if there's no data going into the index, you have got the variation. So yeah, that's the problem. But to try and answer your question of how many you need, unfortunately, a trait like days to calving, you actually need quite a lot because it's a lowly heritable trait. So the heritability of days to calving is less than 10% compared to, say, growth where it's 25 to 30%. So the lower the heritability means you need more progeny per sire to get a reasonable accuracy, because low heritability means that more of the variation is due to non-genetic reasons, and that makes sense for fertility, doesn't it, as well? There's lots of reasons why a heifer won't conceive beyond genetics. There's lots of other external factors, environmental factors. So you're looking at needing, I don't know, to get a reason. It's also what's a reasonable accuracy. It's a bit like how long is a piece of string. But I would have thought that for highly used bulls, you should be looking at getting 25, 30 daughter progeny at least to get a reasonable accuracy. That'll give you an accuracy of 75 to 80% would be my rough sort of guesstimate. So you need 25 or 30 heifer progeny records. So it's,
The opportunity is definitely, I would say, in the commercial goods, because the missing ingredient is the cost of parentage.
Yeah.
You get the cost of parentage, you can get the number of natural side progeny from a commercial farm. We have names, so we have an individual ID scheme. I think to do it in a commercial herd rather than complicate seed stock herds is the area, I think, as that price comes down.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Any other questions of Peter?
We did have, I talked about with Peter, I just think it would be interesting for some of our breeders to see with Angus. New Zealand's had quite a few questions about the Pinebank Y Group 4197 bull and his eye muscleria, on why it changed so much with the carcass data going in. I've discussed with Joe, and I talked with Willie Falloon. He's quite happy for that information to be shared. So ABRI have presented us with some data which is really quite compelling on why that happened, because the bull had a really high accuracy for his EMA from a large number of scanned data, like 400, Joe, before there was any animals killed. I believe there were 17 animals killed after the long feedlot process. So we've got the results here, and his EBV went from 3.8
or 9
to 7.7, which people are saying, oh, hang on.
His accuracy was only 83% though when he went in.
Yeah,
Well, that's not that high.
no, but there was a lot of animals.
Yeah, and I think, as I said before that, it's the carcass data that really.
It was the carcass data, and
that's
this
the
is,
impact, not the
this is
scan
what
data.
we've actually got.
Yeah,
We've actually got
what's
some
actually-
really good.
Not to confuse it, but what's actually more relevant with that bull is what happened to his carcass weight.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah,
No,
that's
not
what-
his EMA, his carcass weight.
His carcass weight too.
That's,
Yeah.
that's what New Zealand is meant to be looking at.
Yeah. That's what we're trying
That's
to
reflected.
to see if we can show.
Trying to find that file you gave me.
P bank up the top, is it?
I think that's the
graph, is it?
graph. When this is done some while. I think the best way to find it now, Neil. I copied in here, but it's sorted on date.
Oh, hang on, was it right? Was it not?
Well, is that there? But I'm not sure whether that's the.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Sorry, yes. Okay. So there we go.
So how do we explain this?
So this is his New Zealand. Whoops, sorry. I'm going. So this is a graph of his adjusted skin eye muscle area. This is New Zealand data.
New Zealand scan data.
New Zealand scan data. So this is the scan eye muscle area against scan weight, the weight of the animal it's scanned. And it shows us that on average, heavier animals are going to have bigger eye muscle areas on average. Okay, this is one of the reasons why we adjust eye muscle area to a constant AD endpoint, because we need to take out that automatic correlation that bigger animals, heavier animals are going to have bigger eye muscle areas. But anyway, that's it. So I think the blue dots are the Pine Bank 4197's progeny, and the red are all the rest.
Everything else.
Yeah, everything.
Thousands of them.
But essentially, what that says really is that he's late mature.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Which fits
I
with
think
this
those
profile.
blues are pretty well spread across the whole
Yeah.
4 quarters there. I
Yeah.
think that's what it's saying. They're pretty evenly
Yeah.
spread.
Yeah.
And
And we go to
when you go to Australia,
second graph,
that's the scan data from Australia.
where that bull's been used, and the red dots are animals that are in the same contemporary groups where he's been used as well.
On the same farms.
Same farms, yeah.
So there again, that data is pretty well spread around the 4 different quarters
Yep.
of those graphs.
Yep. And then we move down to the next one where this is his data scan measurements from the sire benchmarking project. So what we've just looked at. So the blue ones are his steer progeny and heifers, because it's the scans, and the reds are all the
other
contemporaries.
In cohort, so that's the whole of cohort 1 there.
Cohort one, yep.
The blues and the reds.
That's the slaughter progeny.
That's the slaughter progeny
Yeah.
from cohort 1. The next graph really explains it well.
Yeah, the next graph then is the carcass weight in carcass EMA. So this is actually once
Relationship.
once they've been stored, it's not the scan anymore, it's the actual carcass. So that shows that they then tend to be back in these quartiles here.
So if you take kind of bunch them up and try and see, put a circle around them, which is kind of like around there. You look at what's happened there is the average carcass weight of those animals was about -30. It was about 30 kilos. Wasn't right? That's about where it's sat in those groups. But yet, a lot of them are above the line for EMA. So it's the relationship. What's changed is the relationship between the eye muscle area and the carcass weight in those actual carcass animals, and that happened with those in the long fed. They were later maturing animals, weren't they? Or older animals than what had been scanned.
Well, the other simple way to look at it is that they're the carcass weights. They're on the lower end of the scale for carcass weight, but they're on the higher end of the scale typically for EMA.
So the more blue dots in that left quarter.
They're relative to their weight, they had a bigger eye muscle area. And that's the eye muscle area EBV is expressed relative to weight. So
That's why his EBV went up.
Yeah, just to add to that, Is there not a problem though with the way that EMA is calculated with relative to weight? Because what it's essentially saying, I know that's not the right way to look at it, that some of these small bulls have got bigger EMAs and some big bulls have got little.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to look at the contemporary group stuff on actual weight, disregarding physical weight, or actual area. What I'm trying to say is have you got it right between weight and size in your calculation?
Who knows?
Or is there a way to bring?
This could be just an outlier too, couldn't it? It could be just an outlier.
One thing to be a little bit I don't know whether it's just another way of looking at it. Like, we could express so much there relative to age, as done in North America. So we've got to be really careful looking at ribeye area EPDs in the US, comparing them with EMA EBVs in Australia, because EMA EBVs in Australia are adjusted for weight, so that they're relative to a weighing point, whereas in the US those EPDs are age adjusted, so they're quite different. So an age adjustment one will mean that the higher growth animals will typically, as we see particularly on those elder graphs, we know that on average heavier animals are going to have bigger eye muscle areas. It's just an auto-correlation, if you like. They're bigger, so they've got bigger eye muscle areas, they've got bigger everything. But if we adjust it for weight, it means that we can select for eye muscle area independent of weight, which makes it a more, in my mind, a more useful tool. But whether it's, which way is right or wrong is debatable, I suppose, in terms of what you want. Ideally, what you should be doing is not focusing on too much, but looking at when it goes into an index. Because then when it goes into index, it doesn't really matter whether it's weight adjusted or age adjusted. It's adjusted appropriately for profit. So it goes into a profit index.
Anyone want to raise anything else? Great opportunity while Peter's here.
Any plans, Peter, to follow the cows beyond heifer meetings, like mature cow weight? I was wondering about in the progeny test.
Yeah, our agreement with the cooperative herds is such that we get the first parity information on them only. But some of the cooperative herds we're following through. So what we've done is that they were basically commercial Angus females, and we put them on our system now as base APR cattle. So they're sort of registered. They're not herdable registered, but they're registered as on our system. So some of the breeders are continuing on with those heifers. So we will follow them through as much as we can, but I have to admit I don't have great hopes of getting a lot of data on it, because there's so many reasons why contemporary groups then get mixed up by the time we get mature cow weights on them. So we'll do our best, but it's not actually part of the design of the project to get that, unfortunately. We just couldn't commit a commercial cooperated herd in there for a long period is required to get that sort of information. If our research stations or somewhere could be a bit different, but commercial, when you're working with commercial operators, we haven't been able to commit them to do that. Yeah. Just for interest, there are a couple of research stations in Australia. I'm probably jumping the gun a bit and telling you this, but there's a couple that are likely to come on as cooperated herds in this program. So one's at Trengy, so you've probably heard of the Trengy Angus herd. It's been involved in a lot of research for many years. Well, that Trengy Angus herd, about a 350 cow herd, that'll likely to be one of our cooperated herds for the future. So when we're working with a research herd like that, we may well be able to have a better chance of following heifers through mature cow size, for example. And there's another research herd also we're looking at working with as well, so we might have some of those herds involved in the program.
Peter, even though the groups of heifers, contemporary groups of females that you make it from cohort 1 last year were very small, they calved, didn't they?
Yeah.
Did you notice was there any anecdotal differences in the pregnancy rates or calving rates on any of those side groups, anecdotally?
No, nothing that's not reflected through the days to calving. So the graph I showed you there was the days to calving.
Yeah.
So we could, we're looking at other ways we might be able to present some of that fertility data. So we could look at pregnancy rate information, for example, now which
That's what I was
some,
asking.
yeah, but it's because of the low numbers that could well be misleading. That's the trouble. So we've got to be quite cautious about what sort of raw data we put out there because it can be misleading because of the low numbers, particularly for fertility.
Richard?
Just another subject, Peter. How's Angus Australia handling the genetic defect testing on the breeders over there? I don't know if there's another one coming out, but it's caused
Haven't looked at the emails yesterday, but I suppose Angus Australia's board's policy is to take a deregulated approach to it, provide information and let the breeders make decisions on how they manage these effects. Particularly with DD, the incidence of DD in Australia is very high. We've had a reasonably high number of actual cases reported, phenotypes, which in most countries they haven't observed those. We haven't observed quite a few in Australia. When we calculate the frequency of the gene across the population was such that about 15% of our current generation calves, like this is 2013, last year, were carriers. The 15% carrier level is quite high. So what it means is it puts you in an area where the approach of culling them out of the herd and moving on no longer works. Where some of that, we've got a genetic defect of low frequency. The best way to deal with it really is to identify the animals and cull them. We just don't use them anymore. But with DD in particular, because we've got such a high frequency, we've got to get people need to move from a culling approach to a management approach. And to manage it. So like I'll accept a degree of DD in my female herd, but I'll just make sure that I don't use DD carrier bulls in the future, for example, and breed away from it over time. That's effectively what I understand the dairy industry do. The dairy industry have been had too much earlier because of the high use of AI and identifying genetic conditions much earlier. Have worked out ways of managing it. And there are bulls out there that you can still buy semen from that are known carriers for different conditions, because the reality is that every bull is going to be a carrier of something, but in most cases we don't really know what it is at this point in time. So it's more a strategy of managing those conditions rather than eliminating, and so that's reflected through the Angus Australia. So we don't have any regulations as such that carrier animals can or can't be used or sold or anything. But what we essentially do is work with the breeders, facilitate testing, and put those test results on our website. Put it through a gene probability analysis, the gene problem analysis, so that we've got the test results plus the probability of relatives based on the test results being carriers. Have that available on all animals in a very open and transparent way, and then allow members to manage it. So that's essentially the approach. There's no stigma on selling carriers because DD is a good example where people had bulls in the pipeline, very good bulls. So it becomes a question. Now if you've got the opportunity to buy a really high indexing bull that might have lots of profitability characteristics about him, but he happens to be a carrier of DD, and you're a commercial herd that in the past has never actually used any or much genotype bulls in the past that were carriers. So if you haven't got a DD presence in your cow herd, well, that bull might be actually one of the best bulls for you to use because he's indexed. He might be very profitable. You might actually get him quite cheap because he's a carrier. So I wouldn't necessarily say that a commercial herd shouldn't buy a carrier bull because the decision really depends on what they've used in the past. If they've used a number of carrier bulls over several years and got a degree of frequency of the gene in the herd, well, they probably should be looking away from using carrier bulls for that particular condition and use other bulls. But unfortunately, Richard, as we advance in this world of genetics, we're going to identify more recessive conditions that we'll need to manage over time, and the dairy industry doesn't do that. That's part of breeding dairy cattle. It's also these days part of breeding beef cattle, and I suppose the challenge is to identify these things earlier so that we can manage them before they become widely prevalent in the industry, and that's where the genomics technology, I think, can help us a lot. There's some research, really interesting research going on at the moment in North America that we will benefit from, New Zealand and Australia, where hopefully we'll come up with some information and methods so that we can identify some of these undesirable recessives much earlier before they become prevalent. So
Well,
we
corkscrew would be one, wouldn't it? I mean, it's prevalent in the Angus breed, has been for a number of years.
Yeah. So one of the difficulties with all this is you need to have a good measure of the phenotype as well. And corkscrew, okay, we hear reports of it in Australia as well. Fortunately, not as much now as what we did a few years ago, I have to say. But we have very little information of, well, who was the bull at corkscrew? What actual data have you got? So we have anecdotal information and we hear about it, but we don't actually get hard facts. Unless you've got, that this particular animal with this pedigree had this condition, whether it's corkscrew or whether it's anything else, we need to have a very clear description of the phenotype, what the problem was, and then if you get that on a number of cases, you've got an opportunity to do a genetic analysis of it. And something as prevalent as corkscrew, we really don't have that information available in Australia anyway. Yeah, so if you've got a number of cases, so the first thing we encourage our members to report unusual calves and conditions to us. The report is probably not as good as it should be, but we encourage them, and the first thing we do then is do a parent verification, so we know you can go down a blind alley if you get the parentage wrong. So people might say, oh yeah, this is definitely a calf of that sire. Well, we've actually got to prove it. We need DNA from the sire to prove it, because the lack of that information has sent us down blind alleys a bit before with some of the other conditions. CA, for example. One of the reasons why it took so long to develop the DNA test for CA was that the researchers went down a couple of blind alleys because they were told that animals had certain pedigrees, and in fact they were incorrect. So you've got to go through a process. So that's the other thing I suppose we've done. We've developed quite a formal process where if abnormal animals are reported to us, how we react to that, so that we can show that the pathway, I suppose. And what we do is we do a DNA test. We put that on file, and if we get, say, any more than 3 cases, we then consult with a geneticist to start looking at doing some genetic analysis of it, so we can identify a test.
Angus, New Zealand would just have to reiterate, though, that the incidence of DD in New Zealand is extremely low. The frequency is extremely low, so the frequency in the commercial industry would be very, very low. So the risk over here is much lower than in Australia.
Still extremely low. Get people to report rather than be scared of it. Anything abnormal. Otherwise you can't track it.
We've got really compelling data from, you're probably sick of looking at graphs, but I can, we keep tabs on all of the tests that are done. We can then estimate, based on the frequency of the gene in the population, of how many affecteds that we should actually get in that testing if the affecteds were quite viable. So, for example, if we've got about 100,000 tests, we've got about 10,000 tests on DD. 15. We know the results of those tests. We can calculate the expected number. When we have carrier by carrier matings, we can work out the expected number of affected calves that should be reported and tested, and the number is almost exactly half. The actual is about half of what we expect of calves that are tested for DD, which would mean the other half that just don't turn up have disappeared out of the system. Most likely they've died in utero and never been born. But if DD had no impact on the viability of calves, well, we would expect to get a certain number, and we only get half that number. And that's consistent both in Australia and in the USA, where we've shared data with us as well. So certainly, DD, we initially thought DD was just related to animals with multiple limbs, but it's obviously related to a whole range of other things, duplication type things in animals that affect their viability, and it appears though in a lot of cases it affects their viability such that they don't actually survive in utero. So a big embryonic loss associated with it. So anecdotally, it's circumstantial evidence, I should say, because we haven't done the research yet. It's underway to do some research looking at following embryos through, but of carrier-by-carrier joinings that we can deduce based on the fact that they don't appear when they're tested, but they've disappeared from the system.
Yeah, isn't it the case also that there are some affected ones that do have abnormalities, but they're not apparent visually, they're actually abnormalities inside. If you slaughter them and open them up, you'll find things that they may never die or may never be affected, but they still do have symptoms of it.
Well, it might be a duplication, it's not going to affect the viability of the animal.
Yeah. And I think in Australia anyway, in the bull sales we've seen, there was some sales just recently where there was a high number of cattle that had a high probability. They weren't tested either to be clear or to be carriers. And the commercial industry takes almost no notice. There's no difference to the animals that had a probability and the ones that didn't. So the commercial industry is relying on the seed stock industry just to slowly breed it out. It doesn't seem to have been a huge problem, but as Peter said, it probably has been a bigger problem as people realise. The embryonic loss is never actually ever identified.
The challenge is for New Zealand Angus to get the gene probe results to reflect what's at the Australian results, because they don't. The whole year is sitting in there, which
that's a database issue. There's no reason why that should be happening. So people who look after our databases should be working with us on that.
Probably some people have got to get off probably and get flights. So just before we do and indeed have a beer, on behalf of you all, I'd like to thank you very much, Peter, for that very comprehensive presentation. I found it fascinating. Having been on the webinar before, you sort of learn more the second time round. So that was great, and we really appreciate you and Mike coming back over here. You've been regular visitors over the last few years, and your input to Angus New Zealand is very much appreciated. So I'd like everyone to show you appreciation. Just before you get up, and while I'm on the thank you front, as I alluded to earlier on, we've a new CEO and Graham, and he's shortly to start. But I'd just like, well, there's a number of you here, to thank Guy Sargent very much for the transit for pulling us out of the shit, basically, and keeping the operation going, and even as the organising today, that's very much appreciated. I know all breeders, Guy, have very much been thankful for your contribution, so thank you. Thank you.